It's been something that's been on my mind. It's been something that I've thought about in a lot of different fashions. And I think a lot, and some people may think that maybe I spend too much time focusing on the words that we use, but I think the words that we use are very important. And I think it's not only the concept of what we're discussing, but if we don't use the proper words, then maybe we're not sending the proper message, whether we realize it or not. And so there's been a lot that's been going through my mind regarding words, and different words really that we sometimes use and may not use in a manner that is most beneficial. But as I got to thinking about this, I simply got to thinking about the idea that when we think about words, there are a lot of things that we need to make note of. And the first thing is that we need to recognize that words can either create or they can destroy. Words have a lot of power. And I can remember, and we probably all can if you're in the same category of age as I am or you're older. Maybe we don't hear it as much today. Some of you that are younger may have heard it too. But do you remember the sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me, or words will never hurt me? You know how untrue that statement is? You know that sometimes words can hurt far worse than any physical thing that we can do to someone. Sometimes, if a person really wants to do something that's going to hurt someone else, the worst thing they can do is actually say something that is detrimental to them. And so I want us to recognize, and over and over again in Scripture, the Bible talks about the tongue and the power of the tongue. And in Matthew chapter 12 and verse 37, we're taught that by our words we will either be justified or by our words we will be condemned. And so I want to look at this idea, and it's going to be really a short walk through some Proverbs in Scripture, because I believe there's a lot to say there. As you look at the idea of Proverbs, it is always good to remind people that Proverbs are not absolute truths. It's not, this is the way it always is and there's no other way around it. But Proverbs are, as a general rule, and the majority of the time, this is the case. And the only example that I can think of to give you for that is, in Proverbs we have one of the Proverbs that we all know in regard to children is, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. I can tell you right now that there are parents who have trained up their children very well, and it's unfortunate that their child departed from that way. But I can tell you, I know far more people who have trained up their child in the right way, and guess what? Their children didn't depart from it, right? And so we understand this is a general rule. As far as some uses of the tongue, in Proverbs 12:18, it says, there is one who speaks like the piercings of a sword, but the tongue of the wise promotes health. And that's the idea kind of that I was getting at, that when someone says something to you, it can really cut you, right? It can really cut to the heart. It can really hurt. Just like a sword has the ability to pierce through something or to cut something, your words can cut through the heart of someone if you are not using your words properly. And then I think about this idea of the tongue of the wise promoting health. And this might be just a little bit different idea than some people might think. But I think of the idea of when you share a kind word to someone when they are feeling ill. When you go and you see someone when they're in the hospital. When you go and you visit someone in their home when they're struggling. Maybe it's a broken limb. Maybe it's some kind of sickness. But when you talk to them and you spend some time speaking with them and using their words, you notice them start to feel better? They do, don't they? It's more of a mental thing, but they will actually start to feel better. And that's because of words of encouragement. So, for a moment, just on the flip side of that, what happens when we don't use our words? Think about that same person that's in the hospital, at home alone, whatever it is, and they're not getting encouragement. Have you ever heard someone say, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole? What are they saying? I don't want to get depressed based on these things that are happening. And you know what? It can be easy to do. And it's something that's going on in the world today, and people are in homes and they're getting depressed. They are. People are getting depressed because they can't get out of their homes, because of certain things that are going. COVID-19 is changing a lot of things. And the reality is, and we need to recognize, is that there are people that are struggling with things they've never struggled with before. And so, as they sit, and as they hear words, and they're hearing words on the media, right? They are hearing things. And I'll tell you, I don't like to watch the news. I don't like to read the news. I don't like to think about the news, unfortunately. And that's a sad thing, but it's because there is so much negativity that's out there already. And then if you're at home alone and you're depressed because of what's taking place with COVID-19, and then you see all of the bad things that are going on with it as well, and so that's all you ever hear, and what happened? You've gone down the rabbit hole. And that's what happens. Unless there's somebody there to encourage you and to help get you out of the rabbit hole. Right? And there may be people that have gone down the rabbit hole and they can't get out on their own. And so we need to use words of encouragement to reach down into that rabbit hole and bring them back up, right? Because they're not going to do it on their own. Do we think about the fact that sometimes not saying something can be almost, I don't think it's as, but almost as detrimental as saying something? There are times when our brothers and sisters need to hear from us. There are times when they need to know that we care. And this is a time in the world today where that, I don't like the phrase, and I hear it all the time, now more than ever, we should be doing this. Like, now more than ever, you should be washing your hands after you use the restroom. And now just as ever, these are the things you should be doing. And just as we should have always been communicating with one another in the past, it's something that we need to be doing right now. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 21. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. What you say either builds up or tears down. Proverbs chapter 15 and verse 1. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. This idea of being thoughtful and gentle with our words. You know, there's the acronym that says think before you speak. And it goes, think, THINK. Is it truthful? Is it helpful? Is it informative? Is it necessary? And is it kind? THINK. I think that's a good acronym for us to remember. Because there's a lot of things that sometimes come out of our mouths that just weren't necessary. They certainly weren't very kind. Right? And I'm going to tell you right now, just because it's truthful doesn't make it necessary. Just because it's truthful doesn't mean you're going to be kind. There are times when things ought not be said, or they ought to be said differently. They ought to be said differently. This idea of a gentle answer turns away wrath, again, let me give you real world example because it's something that I've experienced in my life, in the professions that I had before I started preaching full-time. One of my jobs for a long period of time was training people how to do customer service over the telephone. Basically, customer service over the telephone is you're going to be talking to someone who's going to be using their words to beat you up. That's what customer service generally is. People don't generally call customer service just to say, hey, I had a good experience. Just wanted to let you know, I got my new TV, I set it up, and it works exactly the way I expected it to. Thank you so much. I didn't hear those calls. The calls you would hear are, hey, I got my new TV, I tried to set it up, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong. What's your problem? Right? And it's not the person on the other end of the line's problem. They didn't do anything. But that's kind of how we get when we're frustrated with something, and so we bring that on others. And this idea of a gentle answer turns away wrath. I taught those individuals, and it works, and you've heard it before. The louder somebody else gets, the softer you get. That's what you do. If you get loud, they'll get louder. If they get louder and you get louder, you're going to escalate. But if you slowly start to bring your voice down and you keep it at a soft tone, eventually the tone of the individual drops as well. And you don't have that same anger. But if you start arguing with them, they call you up and say, I want to know what you're going to do about it. The first thing you say is, well, I didn't do anything. Why are you attacking me, right? Isn't that the response sometimes that we give people when somebody attacks us for something, and we don't think, well, it's not my fault, I didn't do anything. And pretty soon, there it goes, right? But if we can give a soft, thoughtful answer, it will turn away the wrath. It will allow for the type of communication and conversation that is necessary. We have a contrast that's given. The idea of life words and death words. And you'll notice that some of the verses are in both categories, and that's because you have a statement and then you have a but in there that says here's the opposite. But let's just read through these very quickly. If you have your Bibles open, you can look at Proverbs, the 10th chapter. We'll look at verse 21, which we looked at. The lips of the righteous feed many. And that's the positive side that he is talking about. The lips of the righteous feed many. And what is important about being fed? When we're nourished, we're kept healthy, right? Do we think about that? Do we kind of consider what the words mean? So a righteous person feeds or helps others. We're not going to finish the contrast to that. We'll jump forward because we're looking at the positives to Proverbs chapter 12. And verse 18. We looked at this. In the second half of the verse, it says, the tongue of the wise brings or promotes health. So, again, words can bring life. You'll see that that particular verse is the first one on the other side, which talks about the idea of death and the piercings of the sword. If we look now at the last one on the life words, we have Proverbs chapter 15 and verse 4. Proverbs chapter 15 and verse 4. A wholesome tongue is a tree of life. We don't use that word wholesome so much, I think, in today's society. Again, I think that's more a word that might have been used in the past. You know, maybe that's a word I'll pick. Maybe that's a word that the Pearts may be more familiar with, or maybe Doug and Shelby may be more familiar with, or Levi, or some of you that have had the blessings on being on this earth a little bit longer. But we don't usually use the term wholesome all that much. And I guess for me, the best thing that I can think of is when people talk about there's no wholesome programs on TV anymore. There's no good and wholesome programs on TV. There's really nothing that you can watch that's just uplifting and clean and just makes you feel good, right? There's no wholesome movies anymore. There's just nothing like it. And you know what? There are people today that are saying, I don't want to watch that movie because that's probably a wholesome movie. I don't want to watch that because it's probably too clean. Oh, really? Well, that movie's rated PG. It's not rated PG-13 or R, so it's probably not worth my time. It's probably not very exciting, right? There are people that don't want this idea of wholesome. But I'll tell you what, it would be nice to get back to a world that looked like where everything was a wholesome environment, where everything was clean, and people just treated each other the way they should. That starts with how we speak to one another, doesn't it? We create an environment by how we speak to one another. We looked at Proverbs 12:18. Continuing on in Proverbs 15:4, we looked at the beginning. It says, but perverseness in it breaks the spirit. And so, what's this idea of breaking the spirit? We talked about it. It's the idea of saying things that beat someone down, right? Did you know that if you tell someone enough times how bad they are, they'll start to believe it? Right? If you hear something long enough, and it's all you ever feel, or all you ever hear, then you start to believe it. And so we can really, really, really tear someone down. If the only time we ever talk to our kids about school is when they've done something wrong and nothing else, they start thinking they're a bad student, don't they? If the only time we ever talk to our children about anything is to tell them what they've done, then they start thinking they're a bad child. I must be a bad person. It can really crush the spirit. Are there times where we have to take care of and discipline? Yes. But is it the only time that we ever do it? Is it the majority of what we... Do we sit back and we say, you know what? All Brian ever hears is, I really wish Brian wouldn't lead the table anymore. Because I just really don't care for what he has to say when he's up there. Or when Brian is teaching a class, it really doesn't do anything for me. Or do we say those things? At some point, you know what Brian's probably going to say? Well, if you don't want me to lead the Lord's table, if you don't want me to teach a class, then there's no point in teaching a class, right? Brian, if you felt like we didn't care for a word you had to say, would you feel like you should put the effort in to teach a class? No. Does that stop you from wanting to teach? No. You'll find somewhere else, right? But it can crush a spirit. If all Levi ever heard from the young people was, well, I don't want Levi teaching in my class. He's too old. He can't relate to me right now. Does that make you feel good, Levi? Whether you express it at the time or not, does that make you feel good? Or do you start thinking, you know what? I keep hearing that I'm out of touch with these young... Maybe I really am out of touch. Maybe I shouldn't teach them because maybe I really am out of touch. Words can crush a spirit. But I want to give a flip side to this one, only because I believe that very firmly the opposite is absolutely true. If we're saying if you tell someone something long enough, they'll believe it, then if Brian keeps hearing, you know what? Brian, I really appreciate the words you had to offer at the Lord's table this morning. Brian, I really appreciated the way you taught that class. You know what? I was talking to, Levi does a really good job when he's teaching me. You start believing that I'm doing a pretty good job, right? You start believing that maybe I do have the ability to do these things. And so our words can either crush the spirit or they can completely strengthen it and allow us to move. And a scorching fire in Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 27. An ungodly man digs up evil, and it is on his lips like a burning fire. When you have a burning fire, what does a burning fire do? Well, it destroys, for one thing. So there's one way to look at it, is what's on his lips will destroy. The other thing that I think about is when you have a burning fire, it is a desire to do something. It's something that is a part of it. So there's this desire for destruction. And we have to be very careful about what we do and what we say. We are living in trying times. I mentioned the coronavirus has us asking and thinking questions such as this. Whoops, let me go back. Do you have it? And if you do, are you going to give it to me? Did I just touch something that you touched? Are we breathing the same air? All of these things go through our mind, don't they? We're thinking these things. What about masks? Do I need to wear a mask? Do I not need to wear a mask? These are trying times. These are times where we have to do a lot of thinking. And these are times where we have to talk about what we're thinking. You know, somebody comes up to me and says, you know, why do you wear a mask? Why are you willing to do that? What? You know what? For me, I do it just as much for the other person as I do for myself. It's not the most comfortable thing in the world. It's different. But you know what? If it means that I can do something to protect you, then I'm going to do it. And I hope people kind of think about that. And I don't want to get down on people that say that they just don't want to. Coming at it from a biblical standpoint for me, the idea of esteeming others better than self means that if it's something that's beneficial to someone else, even though it might be not what I desire, then that's what I do, right? But these are tough times. These are times we need to think and we need to talk about it. And as I said, we start getting these ideas in our head. Ooh, do you have it? Did I touch what you touched? You know, what's going on? And I see the news, well, and the news tells me if I touch something you touched, I'm in danger. You know, and so there's a lot of bad information out there, and there's a lot of good information. And if all we get is bad information, we have a problem, don't we? We need to talk. Some of the worries. Will it ever end? Will COVID-19 will it go away? What is it? Do we even fully know? Do we even fully understand? Can COVID exist or live on paper or surfaces? Are kids at a higher risk? Who is COVID killing? These are thoughts that are going through people's minds. These are thoughts that may be going through your brother or sister's minds, or your own mind. And that's okay. That's okay because that's where we're at in the world today. Is COVID, here's one, is COVID nothing but a hoax? You know, there are people that believe that. I've got a brother who really doesn't think it's real and doesn't take it serious. And we talk when I can. I've tried to express to him my feelings on the situation, and it's all I can do. But what if the people that feel that way are the only ones that are communicating? Then we have this whole ordeal now of, oh, this is all fake. I'm I'm going to go against this whole idea, and I'm going to get up as many people as I can to agree with me. And there's just a lot. It's a tough time, and things are difficult. So really there is a solution when we think about the idea of words and understanding the fact that we have to use them. There is an expectation that we speak with one another. So understanding that we have a responsibility to speak, understanding that we have a responsibility to share, we need some kind of guideline to help us. And where would we find it? Scripture, right? That's going to give us the guideline of where to go. Psalm 19:14. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. One more time. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. As we speak, as we think about our conversations, ask yourself, are the words that I'm using acceptable to God? Do my words bring health and life like we looked at in this particular study? Do they bring life? And do they bring hope? Are they an encouragement to others? You see, being apart does not mean we stop encouraging each other. We just have to find other ways to do it. And we're blessed enough to live in a society where we have the technology to be able to do it. See, just because we can't all be together in this building, it was mentioned in our announcements. We haven't seen the bells in a long time. We haven't seen Denny and Karen in a long time. We haven't seen Michael Dickinson in a long time. Remember Michael? Who just recently got married, who has a lot going on in his life in the midst of everything that's happening. Have you shot him a text every now and then? I guarantee you, he'll get back to you. I guarantee you, he still thinks about this congregation. But he's home because of COVID partly, and because of studies. But he's a part of this group. If you reach out via text, via phone, however you're comfortable reaching out, use what you're comfortable with, I guarantee you there will be responses. I'm sure that there are those of you in this congregation, because I know and I've seen what you do, that you've been in contact with the Bells, that you've been in contact with Denny and Karen, that you've been in contact with people. Darabelle comes to mind. Just because we're apart doesn't mean that we stop being a Christian. Just because I have to spend more time in the four walls of my home doesn't mean that means I get to take a break from performing my Christian responsibilities. What it does mean is I have to find a different way to do it, right? It does mean I have to find a different way to do it. Am I still, whether able to go and visit someone in their home or whether doing it in a different way, am I still doing all I can as a Christian? Who can I reach out to today? It's not really coincidental that the idea of procrastination is following this particular idea. I didn't say, who can I reach out to sometime this week, because sometime this week isn't on the calendar. Right? Who can I reach out to today? One person. Doesn't have to be everybody. But who's one person that I can take the time to encourage today? Maybe a card, a call, a text, an email. Doesn't have to be long. It can be something as simple as, hey, I was just thinking about you today. Wanted to let you know. I won't mention the individual's name, but there is an individual that how we communicate is basically we find a joke of the day every day, and we text it back and forth, and we both get a laugh. We don't live in the same state, so we can't see one another. But you know what? Every now and then, it moves from the text or the joke to just a little bit about how the day's going. But it doesn't have to. Just seeing that text every day reminds me that he's okay. Who am I going to pray for today? That goes back to, again, think about today. You know, making sure that we invite people to come down in our invitation and we encourage them. They'll come to us and they'll say, will you pray for me? I'm having this struggle. Do we say, okay, well, so-and-so came forward. Let's make sure that we pray for them. And then let's now have our closing prayer. Or let's finish up however we finish up, right? Or do we stop right there because someone has come to us and asked us, will you pray for me? And we do it right then and there, don't we? Because what happens if we don't do it right then and there? Do we sometimes forget? It may not be intentional. Do we sometimes forget? That's why we have to communicate, right? Because we do forget. I can't remember everything that's going on in every person's life all the time. And I can't be expected to unless somebody lets me know what's going on. In the same way, I can't expect you to know everything that's going on in my life unless I'm willing to express it, right? Unless I'm willing to communicate. Words, whether written or whether spoken, are important. Words can either hurt or they can heal. I wish there was one more question on there. What did your words do today? And then I want you to think about, that's in the past. What did they do? And I want you to ask yourself and think about as we close this morning, what will your words do today? If there's any way that we can help you, and we invite you to come forward while we stand and sing the closing song.